Ding, 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 ding. Welcome to Talking Pictures Trivia, the podcast in which a group of geographically challenged friends explore movies through trivia as an excuse to keep their friendships alive. I'm one of these friends and today's host, Nick, and with me is
Tom
and KJ.
Great to have you back as always. Additionally, joining us as a guest for this episode is
Ragnar.
Thanks for joining us again, Ragnar. Ragnar and KJ were teachers together in Japan. You may remember Ragnar from our Rules of the Game and M episodes. Ragnar owns and runs the trolley stop in New Orleans. Why not stop by and have some gumbo? Ragnar conveniently continues to like movies. For those joining us for the first time, we start off each episode with a movie quiz, which consists of 2 rounds of 3 questions to determine who will earn today's trivia crown. Then, once the fierce competition is over, we follow it up with our famous movie rant where anything goes. This week, we'll be jumping into the 1921 drama fantasy horror, The Phantom Carriage, directed by Victor Sjostrom, also known for The Outlaw and His Wife, The Wind, starring Lillian Gish, and He Who Gets Slapped. Other big movies in 1921 include The Three Musketeers, Charlie Chaplin's The Kid, and Buster Keaton's The Boat. Tom will be in the quizzer seat today. How would you describe Phantom Carriage?
So the Phantom Carriage is the story really of David Hume. And he learns of a famous rumor, more or less, or a legend, one might say, that the person who is the last to die in the year has to take on the role of really death. And what that requires is you drive around for a year in a carriage and you collect the bodies of the dead um, and bring them on to the next life. We're not really sure, but we know that's the task. David has also abandoned his wife and 2 children and is living a derelict life. He, upon one night drinking in the graveyard, is killed, and the Phantom Carriage comes for him. The idea being he is the last one to die that year. And the person who drives the Phantom Carriage, a man from his past named George, takes him to these episodes in his past, revealing to David his derelict life and providing him with a mandate really to change his ways. Now, there's a lot more going on in this movie that plot summary doesn't pull out, and it's fine. I hope we get into it today. What I find appealing about this movie is that on first blush, it appears to be a simple morality tale. Change your ways, and repent, and the kingdom of heaven will be yours. However, upon rewatch and reflection, and really considering what's happening in here, there is a great influence of kind of Gnostic thought and spiritualism and symbolistic thought kind of wrapped into this. And the kind of the simple critical evaluation that this is an inheritor of A Christmas Carol, right? The Dickens story in which something very similar happens, I think, while has some merit, um, doesn't have, let's say, all the merit. I think the film is doing a lot more, a number of different things and a number of interesting things apart from the Christmas Carol that have to do with kind of the material body and this idea of the spiritual realm as as both something terrifying, but in some cases, a means of accessing a better life. Uh, and I haven't worked out all my thoughts on this movie, and I hope to work it out with you guys. So, KJ, what do you think?
I love this movie. I thought it was great. I enjoyed every minute of it. It was super creepy. The ghost effects were really cool. I think in terms of silent films, this would be a good one to start with. It was very easy to follow the plot, which I struggle with on some silent films. And it grabs you from the first few scenes and you want to watch the whole thing. So if well, I mean, you're listening to the show, I'm sure you've listened to lots or watched lots of silent films. But I think this would be a good one as a starter silent film if somebody was trying to get into silent films. I also really enjoyed the score. I watched the version with the music by, and it was really good. The score was really good. I also listened to it afterwards. It's really good. It would make really good Halloween music. I was driving my daughter home from volleyball tonight, and it was really foggy out. And I know we missed Halloween by a few weeks here with this episode, but it would be great to have this playing during trick or treating. The other score I went back and listened to a little bit was by KTL. I kind of felt like I was in an aquarium watching this movie. There was a lot of like I don't know, background noises. It didn't work as well for the few scenes that I had picked out. And then also about being like a Dickens tale or It's a Wonderful Life, where you kind of look back at your life. In in this movie, he's chosen randomly. It's not. I mean, if he's the last guy to die, that can be anybody. You could have been a really good person or a really. So, I agree. I don't think this was an evaluation of a bad person's life. It just happened to be that's who it was in this year. How about you, Nick?
Well, I actually had some similar thoughts to you, where I thought this was an excellent silent film. In fact, I think even though I have enjoyed some of the other silent films that we have watched on this show, so far this may have been my favorite one. And I do agree with you, KJ. And yes, everyone heard that. I agree with KJ on something, that this is a great starter for somebody into silent films. I think the story was very solid. While I thought it may have had a darker end than it did, I still enjoyed the overall story. I'm not someone who always gets into the sounds and the music, but when you're dealing with a silent film, that is a big component of it. And I thought it was excellent. I believe I did listen to the version with the score by, which was perfect. I mean, it really, when there were the few happy scenes there, you felt it. When there were some really dreadful scenes, you felt that too. And one of the things that really gripped me in this movie right from the get go, this was 1921. The actual portrayal of the Phantom Carriage as this ghostly apparition, and the gentleman who had to work for death for a year to bring these souls into the next domain, that blew my mind. I actually really bought into that, and I was like, how did they do it? Like, the layering of the film, I really thought that was spectacular, especially in this time frame. And again, I may have seen one that was digitally remastered, but still it was really compelling. So in general, I would definitely recommend this to people who even aren't really into going back past the 80s, and would really be benefiting by experiencing this movie, even if it was their first silent film. So I have tons of other thoughts, but I'm going to stop right there, except for that one bit where Tom beat me to it. There were elements where I did almost get a Christmas Carol vibe with the different ghosts coming. Now, it's not exact, but I did get that vibe from it while I was watching it. So I again, I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But in general, I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. Ragnar, what did you think?
Well, I'm quite passionate about this film, and the reason why is something that you guys have talked about. So it's going to be a little bit of an echo. Uh, you guys say that this is a good movie to start with when diving into the world of silent film, and there's a reason for that. This film is a massive achievement because here we are talking about it. We're knocking on almost 100 years since it's come out, and the visuals, the story, these things still resonate with us 100 years later, even though the technology has well surpassed what was available at that time. This is a masterpiece, maybe the greatest and the first of its caliber in movie history. And to me, it's so great because it shows people, just like you were saying, that are afraid to go past the 80s, that modern films do not have a monopoly on creativity. They do not have a monopoly on great pacing and intriguing stories. And there is plenty and plenty to discover even in the 20s. And I think The Phantom Carriage is a perfect example of that. So that is why I think I've loved this film for so many years. It just shows that movies have been good. There have been good storytelling since the beginning of cinema, since before cinema, and there's no reason why one should not go exploring these decades.
I would even say that the storytelling is even of the utmost importance back then because of the limits in technology, and it still surpassed many of the plots of movies we see today.
This movie, I mean, honestly, when I was watching, you were talking about how effective the special effects were. Could this be made nowadays? I mean, it would come off kind of looking silly. It could not be bested from this because it was so creepy, so atmospheric. Everything was so perfect. It's timeless. It truly is a timeless film.
Well, Ragnar, you know what the next question's going to be. You've been here a few times. If we're watching the Phantom Carriage again, what would be the best snack to enjoy while we're doing that?
Well, I think everyone has heard of the fermented herring from Sweden, Sjostrom. I'm sure I'm butchering the pronunciation, but I think this is the only thing that you can eat while watching this film. Not only to get a sense of the country where this movie comes from, but I think it will accelerate your time to become a passenger in this carriage. So I think that is absolutely the way to go.
It's time for Movie Quiz.
And here we are at round 1. The rules for round 1 are it is 1 point per question. However, if you would like an alternative question, once you hear the question, you are free to select the alternative. The alternative can be worth either 2 or 3 points. However, it is a gamble. You are gambling those 2 or 3 points. So be warned. And I'll let you know, not all the alternative questions are harder than the initial questions. So it really is a gamble. All right. Here are the categories. The categories from round 1 all take their names from Selma Lagerlöf novels, who is the person who wrote the novel that The Phantom Carriage is based on. So those categories are Invisible Links, The Outcast, and The Holy Night. Ragnar, what would you like?
The Outcast.
It's time for question 1.
What actually kills David Holmes? Would anybody like an alternative?
We got to Pat Gavin this, so problem is I know the answer to this one, unless it's a trick. All right, I'll take the alternative question.
Okay, the alternative.
So there's 3 alternative questions, and I choose if they're worth 2 or 3. So there's one associated with round 1. Okay, I would like to lose 2 points on the first question.
Okay, and for you, KJ, the question is, what should David serve?
I'm locked in on the real question.
Locked in.
Locked in.
All right, since you locked it last, KJ, you have to go first. What should David serve?
Well, so David could serve a lot of things. We talked about the fermented herring. That would be a nice thing to serve. I don't know how popular volleyball was back in the day, but he could have served during the volleyball game. But I guess what he should serve is 1 year of collecting dead people and helping them on their way. Yeah, well, I don't know, because by the end of the film, I don't even know if he's dead, and he kind of gets forgiven for.
Lock in.
He should serve 1 year of driving the carriage around is what he should do.
All right, thank you, KJ. Ragnar, you locked it second.
That is correct. So what kills David? I would say nothing, since he didn't die.
Okay, thank you, Ragnar. And Nick, what do you have?
You know, when he's right, he's right. But there was a brief moment where he was dead. And what killed him was he took a shot from a bottle to the chest. So I'm going to go for that, because I think he was dead and magically came back after he learned his lesson.
All right. Points go to Nick and Ragnar. I'm accepting both. I think Ragnar, you're more technically correct because he doesn't actually die. However, we could say he dies and his spirit goes back into the flesh or something. It is purposely vague, I think. And Nick, well, I thought it was maybe a bottle to the head. I'm not entirely sure. You get credit because a bottle hit a guy. And we're not even sure if he's dead anyways.
You know what's funny? I actually saw that scene, And I think that's what they were trying to do, but he actually got hit in the chest.
Yeah,
We can go back to
I saw
the
that too on a second viewing.
footage.
Yeah,
Like, I think they were like trying to imply that, but the actual hit looked like it was more in the chest.
Yeah.
So that's why I was trying to be technical.
and KJ, the answer was, it was a bit of a trick question. The answer was his brother's prison sentence.
Ah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
His brother's prison sentence.
So was that a subjective question?
Um,
Because I don't think he should serve his brother. I mean, I guess I don't know.
Well, that's what-
the
that's what they
warden
ask him
thought
to
he.
do.
Yeah, they
That's
did
what he's
think he
asked
should.
to
Yeah,
do.
that's true.
That was iffy legal logic, I would say.
yeah,
Yeah, is that how that works?
KJ, when you get into bonus point sections, you got to expect these curveballs.
Yeah.
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 Yep. Mhm.
indeed.
KJ, a negative, by the way.
KJ, so the points 1-1 and -2. It's a good start, buddy. So one of the interesting things about the scene in which David either dies or doesn't die, is suggested to be dead at least, is that it's one of the few scenes that was shot actually at night. Typically, you had things shot, night for day, that type of thing. Um, and this was part of this brand new film studio built outside Stockholm, uh, Filmstaden, and it was part of this big Svetska Bio film company, and they had this new studio. This is the first movie that was filmed there, and movies have been filmed there until I think 1971. Um, so this is a really big studio, and I'm interested in what you guys thought of the atmosphere of the movie. And I think this scene, I suggest it because I think it encompasses the kind of general atmosphere of the piece. But the scene in the graveyard, the whole sequence of events there, and how it sets the tone for the film.
Yeah, the graveyard was super creepy, and it does set the tone for the rest of the film. However, I think some of the other places end up being creepier, or creepier things happen elsewhere. But this was a great I don't, prologue's not the right word. It taught you how to expect to watch the rest of the movie. And it was creepy with the fog and the ghosts, and it was certainly dark. I'm surprised they were able to film at night back then. What does the lighting look like that they were using?
Yeah, must have been a lot. But what did you think was creepier?
Well, there's a scene in his wife's house. I'm not exactly sure where they are, but he gets surprisingly angry because his wife's trying to save the kids and get them out of the house, and she locks him into a kitchen almost. Um, and the tension in that scene, maybe that was just tense. Maybe it wasn't as creepy, but I was more creeped out by what could have happened in that scene than the guys sitting in the graveyard, kind of telling stories. And then having death come up. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was creepy, but it was on the surface creepy.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's actually very close to my reading of this movie too. Is that the the things of the world end up being more terrifying or more damaging than the spiritual realm, even though I don't think the spiritual realm is exactly a warm blanket either.
It also showed how like these people are truly like the downtrodden in society. I mean, everyone is, or the majority of them are very filthy. Like, it's just not a very good existence. Like, these people are struggling. It's kind of funny because a few of the silent films we've seen, I just feel like everyone is in dark and dreary places and covered with filth. But that may just been the movies that we have seen thus far. But really, that was something very noticeable to me. Not only Death himself was filthy, but these people who are almost like the living dead because they're just subsiding through this lifetime, drinking their way and living horrible lives, that kind of carried through. And it was kind of in that same scene that KJ's talking about with the wife. Even when she does get away finally again, she's now even in a worse shack. I mean, this place, talk about filth. And it's just what we thought couldn't get any worse with the way of living got worse. So I think it just showed you that these were trying times for all of these characters. And that was the one common element that I saw here, aside from the introduction to the Salvation Army characters who were really focusing more on redemption. But they really had a lot to work through to reach these people.
The other scene that was really cool, or the other set that was really cool, kind of bridged the gap. It's where Edit, was her name Edit? You just say it like edit, like you're editing?
I think it's more like eat
Eat
it.
it.
It,
Eat
Eat
it.
it. Eat it.
Like Weird Al. So Edith is dying in a room, and it kind of bridges the gap between that graveyard scene and some of the other scenes. So it's just as creepy as the others, but it's somewhere between life and death, as Edith is. So, yeah, I thought that was kind of cool too. The way each set felt like they were either alive, dead, or somewhere in between.
yeah, I think that this is a great movie where its age and the technology of the time really help it. You know, sometimes we watch movies in black and white or silent films, and they are that way simply because the technology was like that at that point in time. But with Phantom Carriage, when you see it now, that scratchy restoration, the tinting, the black and white, it really all comes together to create this great atmosphere that is available in so many of the scenes. So I think it's almost its age, like an old record, perhaps helps it create a really unique atmosphere.
Yeah, I agree. And the kind of the use of mise scene too in this is very important. The centerpiece of the film is probably when he goes to the hostel and first meets Edith, and you realize in that scene there was a scholar who pointed it out, and I'm sorry I can't remember his name, but there's no front to that collection of rooms. The way you would look at a scene and say, "We're looking at the scene from a particular perspective." The way the camera is always positioned in those collections, it's like 3 or 4 rooms. Um, that you're never stable ever, right? There's no stability in that space where the kind of the material of David and the spiritual of Edith sort of meet. It meets in this place that is actually kind of hard to pin down.
That scene also really shows us the nature of those two characters because there's a small moment where we think Edith's good deed actually reached David home. And then just as he's putting all his buttons up and he's looking proper, he tears the buttons off, rips the patches out, and says, "This is how I like it." So it's really telling of how he's going to be throughout the majority of the movie, as well as Edith's character, where she thinks she can continually reach this lost soul.
And going back to Ragnar's point real quick, like this movie feeling like an old record, when you first see those special effects, I kind of convinced myself, well, they couldn't have done the special effects back then. They must have actually hired ghosts. Like there's that feeling that this film is so old and so tried and true that, maybe, I don't know what Sweden was like in 1920s. Like maybe they were just like, hey, you're kind of transparent. Get in my movie. Like it felt that way
Yeah, it's
with the atmosphere.
Julius Jensson was the cinematographer who was developing these techniques, which we might be talking about in a little while. So
All I will say is that effect did blow me away, even early on this movie. I was like, how did they do this back then?
it's amazing. In the critical literature, once you get into the 1930s and read about responses, Andre Bazin was a critic in the 30s who responded to this. He said that ruined the movie. That movie isn't going to survive into modernity because of
boy.
that special effect. It's too lame.
How wrong? How
Yeah,
wrong?
exactly. It's a great example of different years, different attitudes. All right, and now for question number 2. This is going to Nick. The categories remaining are Invisible Links and The Holy Night.
I'm going to go with The Holy Night.
Ooh, The Holy Night.
It's time for question 2.
How many flashbacks does the film use?
Will the winner be the closest to the number?
No,
You have to
you
hit
have
them
to.
exactly.
Yeah, it's how many like timelines are in flashback. You're not counting every time they're
Oh,
flashback, but how many timelines? Yeah.
Got it.
so how many timelines?
Anybody want to do the alternative?
I'll alternate. I got -2 points. Let's keep going.
2 or 3, buddy?
Oh, let's go for the 3. I got faith in this one.
Okay. KJ for 3. What is David's job? It's the only time we see him employed. What is his employment?
Locked in.
Locked in for normal question.
Locked in.
All right, Ragnar. You locked in last, so you have to go first. What do you have?
Okay, so not including the present timeline, I'm going to say that there were 5 timelines, including the story of the Phantom Driver, which was more of a story within a flashback, but we did visually transfer to another timeline.
Okay, very good. Nick, you locked in second.
Yeah, I'm not really sure if I understand the question, but I'm going to give an answer anyway. I think there were 3, and I think they were revolving David, Edith, and the gentleman who later became the driver of the Phantom Carriage.
Okay, thank you, Nick. And KJ, what do you have?
So I had mentioned earlier this is a good silent film to start with because it was fairly easy to follow. But before I answer, were there scenes where David did not have a mustache?
Yes, there were.
Because sometimes
were?
there were scenes
Okay.
with a dude without a mustache, and I did not know.
Young David.
Young David.
Young David.
Probably young and employed. So I'm not sure what he did because I didn't think that was David. But I think his soul continued on, and he ended up employed with the Muppets as the Swedish chef. So David must have been a chef.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So, I hate to tell you this, no one got any points. Though you guys are lucky because KJ lost 3 points.
So in a way, we gain points, Ragnar.
So, yeah.
I'm going to say he was a carpenter. He was
a carpenter.
apprentice.
Yeah, we see him do that. before
Woodwork,
he-
yep.
What was he making?
Woodwork. There was some kind of
Woodwork.
woodworking going.
Oh, he was planing those boards or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There
Mhm.
was a scene. I was
Yeah.
curious because it looked like a table saw, and I was wondering how they were powering it.
Yeah, it could be foot.
Probably your foot.
That would be a strong foot to cut
Yeah.
through a board
That's
of
true.
wood.
That's true.
But they were.
They were
that was-
stronger people
yeah.
back then.
Well, I mean, they had gasoline engines in
So
1921.
they had an engine attack. Okay,
That's true.
That's true.
That's true.
so the
Yeah.
Foley yardage.
There wasn't a lot of safety. I saw him leaning over the table with the saw in it to like
Yeah.
carry on a conversation. I was
Yeah.
like, whoa.
Yeah,
dude.
there's no
They
like
had-
protection there.
Yeah.
I saw that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they had
They're just
gasoline
like, well.
engines, not OSHA. But so sorry, Kevin. In terms of the timelines, there are 4 flashbacks.
Oh, close.
So we have guys are both close. The first one is the story of George, who and George's story about the coachman.
Okay.
Then we have the flashback to David and his happy family, which ends when he gets out of prison. Third one, when David moves on to the second town and first meets Sister Edith. And fourth one also occurs in the second town when Edith re-meets David and tries to unite him with his wife.
Oh, see, I lumped it into the characters. So okay,
Yeah.
but either way, it's okay.
I had those. I just added the Phantom storyline to
I
it.
see what you're saying, Ragnar. You had those, and then the actual account of the carriage. You should get a point for that. I'll ask the team what they think. Do you think that's fair?
Oh yeah, that's fair. Is that
What do you think, Nick?
No. I
Yeah.
got the 3 people with the
maybe
timeline.
even another point because the host had more time to think about it?
That's
Yeah.
nonsense.
And I answered the woodworking question.
Wow.
So.
I
You don't gotta
I-
give Ragnar points. He's already got a better eye than all of us, KJ.
yeah.
I'm trying to bring the targeting system back.
Yeah. I think I'll give you a point because I think that was more the wording of the question than your lack of knowledge. But let's talk about the structure of this. So there's also a 5-act structure that the film is divided into. Like the acts of a play. Sjostrom does come from the theater after all. But this kind of envelope system where we have these different flashbacks connected together, what is your guys' reading of that? How that worked? Um, what that conveyed? Question. And I have a reading of this, which I kind of want to trickle out, but I want to hear what other people have to say about these collection of timelines, which follows the novel pretty closely.
I was surprised by the flashback in a flashback, but I thought it worked. It was not confusing. I was surprised they were going there, but that worked. As for breaking it up into 5 parts, I don't know if that was necessary. Maybe on multiple watches that makes more sense, but I actually forgotten that until you had
Yeah,
said.
it was a convention of the time. All the movies that came out of that studio broke things up into 5 acts because they're still trying to define themselves against theater, and theater conventions keep trickling in even now.
I didn't have a problem with it. I thought the flow was good. I liked the use of the flashbacks. I was not confused by mustaches or lack of mustaches. So it worked out really well for me.
We talked about how old this film is and how close it was to the birth of cinema, and they're just like we were talking about, just like Tom said, these 5 parts are a holdover from the theater, such as other things, the dramatic acting. Sometimes you'll see their face, very dramatic, in order to have the person in the back of the theater understand what's happening on stage. But what I thought was interesting, and then I'll get back to your question directly, but first I just want to say what I thought was interesting was that the movie has pretty good acting, very natural acting for 1921, because we think about 1940s and 1950s, and that acting is very stilted and very quick dialogue, rapid fire, and it's cool for like noir films, but it hasn't aged particularly well. But in Phantom Carriage, which is even older, it was a very natural acting on display, at least in my opinion. And as for the division into 5 parts, I kind of liked it because the movie itself is a parable. We're supposed to learn something from it. At the end, the driver literally talks to the audience directly. So I think every section had a little takeaway that we were supposed to have that will build up towards the end, which is probably how plays were doing it at that time as well.
Yeah, I commented especially on the performance of Victor Sjostrom and his wife Hilda Brogenstrom, who was I think she was in like 80 something movies. That was, I think, especially a remarkable performance, and a performance that almost seemed filtered through like Stanislavski or method acting. It was in no way in debt to the kind of what we think of as overacting, but what they might call presentational acting that came out of the theater. I mean, it was a deeply, deeply subtle performance, and I love that performance.
I was going to say that I wholeheartedly agree with Ragnar that the acting was magnificent. And of course, Tom seems to think that as well. I found it very interesting that I could really understand more than any of the other silent films that I had seen what was going on in the scenes before the intertitles came in. And that was kind of rare for me. Where in some of the other movies I've seen, I really was dependent on those intertitles. This one, it enhanced it, but did not take away my enjoyment. And they did emote. I mean, you could see what you were supposed to see. And and the funny part is this was in another language too. And I almost felt like I could understand what they were saying in the parts where you can't hear them speak. So I was really blown away by that very early on in the film. In fact, I think when I was watching this, I reached out to some of my co-hosts just to say like this is great quality.
Yeah, without the crutch of dialogue, they have to rely on acting and emoting and making sure the audience feels that. So I think the fact that it is silent really lends itself to this type of acting.
Yeah. All right. Now we are at question number 3. This is Invisible Links.
It's time for question 3.
In the story George tells, how many bodies does the carriage collect, and how do those people die? Would anybody like an alternative?
Yes, I'd like an alternative, and I'd like to break the rules and go for 5.
What?
I allow it.
Yeah.
I like your can-do attitude, KJ. All right.
Tom is drunk with power.
Yes, I often am. It's I just don't know. I don't have any. So here is the alternative question. Well, actually, would anybody else like to jump on that?
It's worth 5.
I'll also give you 5.
5 deal.
Well, what? I'm at 3 or 2 or 1. No.
You are at 2.
And KJ's at
-5.
-5,
Negative
-4.
5. That's
KJ's at negative
double
5.
or nothing here. Well, negative double or
They're just trying to
nothing.
break even.
Mhm.
Negative double or nothing. Okay, no, I'll stick.
The question is, KJ, what is the message that David would like to give to all the world?
Locked in for both questions. Whatever.
Ooh.
No, but
Let's
he
see.
didn't pick it. I'm locked in.
It's
for
just a
Steve.
bonus. It's just a bonus I'm giving.
Oh, locked in.
Since he locked it last, he has to go first. KJ, what do you have?
So David's message to the world in 140 characters or less is cry at the end of the movie and your wife will forgive you.
Very good. I think, Nick, you locked in second.
Is it though? Is it? Yes. And the answer I am prepared to give is 3. And the 3 that I'm going to give are the gentleman who shoots himself and kills himself, the gentleman who drowns after a capsized boat, and I am going to count the death of David because he does come to him and he does pull his soul out of the body. So those are the 3 I am selecting.
Ooh, interesting. I'm going to go with 2. And I'm going to do the suicide and the drowning. And I'm going with 2 because the question states within the tale of the driver. David's soul came out after the story was told. So that's why I'm going to go with 2.
And what was the message, Ragnar?
Oh, the message, it was the prayer, I believe, basically saying to let my soul mature before it is reaped.
Lord, please let my soul come to maturity before it is reaped.
Hallelujah.
So Ragnar is right on both. Nick, you did account for everything, but the question did say within the story George tells. So for that reason, it's a technical reason, which I kind of hate, but
I thought this was all George telling a story. So
well, no, that's that's a good point.
Yeah, that's worth a point, Tom. That
No,
you don't think so?
No, it isn't. No, George is not telling the story of David Home. We are watching it. We are witnessing it.
I liked
Yeah.
it, Nick.
Tried.
You get a point in my book. I'll give you a point
Yeah.
next episode. Yeah.
I thought it was pretty good.
It was
I thought
a good
solid.
argument, yeah, but
Yeah.
Are you going to give me
well,
one of your
actually,
negative points?
can you respond? Yeah, I think we are seeing the story of David Home and George. George is not telling it to us. Would you agree with that, or do you think that's wrong?
I agree with it.
No, I don't think it's wrong. I think there is an interpretation where what I said is right, but I'm not going to push it too
Okay.
much.
Very good.
Yeah.
So what I'm interested in bringing this question forward is this idea of myth and symbol and the kind of spiritual nature of reality that this film brings forward. This movie is made right after there's kind of this Swedish interest in symbolism. We see this in their theater. It's a little later. It's maybe 15, 20 years after that starts to die down. And it's also made right in the throes of expressionism. And so there's a lot of these kind of artistic movements that deal with the falseness of reality, false in the sense that it doesn't convey everything that is a part of our lives and a part of our world.
This may be slightly askew, or it might be on topic, so we'll find out in a second. But one of the things I thought was really cool about the story portrayed in this movie is we always hear these urban legends or these different tales. This was just a cool one I had never heard. The person who dies last in the year has to work for death, escorting the souls of those who die in the next year until the next person dies on New Year's Eve. I just thought it was a creepy but cool premise.
That has to be the best horror movie pitch of all time. I mean, who wouldn't watch that movie?
It blew my mind, Ragnar, that it was so long ago. I haven't heard really that version repeat. I mean, we recycle things on the regular. I mean, there are reboots of reboots of reboots. I mean, we had an episode on the Bride of Frankenstein, and one of Tom's question is, how many movies have a Frankenstein's monster reference? Silly, we couldn't figure it out, but there's a million movies just called Frankenstein. How did I not hear of this clock, ticking midnight on New Year's? And I just thought that was creepy and great.
But I am interested in this idea of what is the nature, and more importantly, what is the attitude this film has towards the spiritual, towards the unreal. Because in Dickens, we get the same type of thing in Dickens. In Christmas Carol, the ghosts take Ebenezer Scrooge to different periods, and he gets to see how you're really supposed to live life and where the source of his trauma is that led him to become the kind of miser that he is. This film, the sort of spiritual reality here, isn't, I don't think, one to fear the way it is in Dickens' world. The last ghost, the ghost of the future, is death. It's cloaked like death. Death is something to be afraid of. Now, there's an element of fear here because if you don't want to be the carriageman, right? You don't want that job. But I think the counter to that is what happens to Sister Edith at the end of the film. She doesn't die, right? She does die. It isn't a tragedy that she dies. That's how the film portrays it. So I'm interested in what you guys think of the kind of the spiritual realm or how it treats death.
I think she is crucial. Her death is crucial to revealing what this film thinks about the spiritual side of the world. And I think that the afterlife or these things that are beyond just regular life are as wide and perhaps neutral as the real world is. And by that I mean we are seeing this horrifying urban legend of the Phantom Carriage, and it normally associates with somewhat bad people. I know at first it seems like, oh, it's just everybody that dies goes in the carriage, but when she dies, and there is no denying that she's basically a saint in this film, he does not take her soul. As a matter of fact, George and David leave, and George tells David, and I'm paraphrasing here, the people that will come for her soul will be here later. Hinting that there's more, that if you are good, that you lead a valuable life, there is something else for you. But if you give in to your base instincts, that if you give in to drinking and fighting and anger, then the carriage awaits for you. And if you're really bad, maybe you're the driver. And perhaps it's not as random as we think it is. Maybe David is not just a random person, but maybe he was actively very bad. and then he's given this fate seemingly. So I think it's a very complex world that's just barely hinted at.
I'm glad you used the word neutral, because that's what jumped out at me too. The driver of the Phantom Carriage, George, as we know, even when really wicked things are happening, for example, David's wife may be taking her life and that of the children, really dark. He just says, I can just watch. I have no control over this, and this is just how it is. If this happens, that's the way it was meant to be. So just that approach to have no feeling about it at all, it creates that neutrality. And I'm also really glad you brought up that scene, because you could almost miss that if you weren't paying attention, that why didn't he take her soul? That's the only time we see someone die that he was not involved with. And at first I was like, wait a minute, did she not die? Are her people coming to take care of her? And then I realized, no, she did die. There's someone else out for her. And in this case, because she led a good life, I'm making the assumption for a better place. But I'm glad you brought up both those points.
Yeah, in the book, you actually see the people who come for her. It's like a room of they're not called angels, I don't think, but they're sort of ethereal. And they just appear in this room. Um, but yeah, they actually were going to do that in the film, but they, I think, wisely cut it out or cut it out of the script. Yeah. The other thing about what you're pointing out, Ragnar, about other people who come for her, death uh, is something not to fear. There is, I think, throughout this a concern with the material, right? The material seems to be extraordinarily dangerous, and it tempts you in a variety of ways. Drinking, most expressly, and what that leads to, and it seems like um, for death is bad for people whose spirit, that kind of little spirit inside inside everyone. This is like a sort of Gnostic perception that everyone has a little spirit that has to be freed from the corruption of the material. Um, and what this movie seems to be saying isn't necessarily like death is bad, but the material is bad. And if you're bound in that, when you die, you aren't really dead because you were never able to sort of break free or transcend the material. And Enid is in a very particular way when she sees that David when David comes to her and he seems to supplicate, he seems to be saved. And so this thing she wants, this kind of material, kind of spiritual thing she wants, she no longer needs. She's gotten it. Um, and she's able to move on. And I think there is also, some critics have pointed this out, and I'm interested in what you guys think. It's not related to a question, but there's sort of hints that critics believe in her performance and in the book that she has more than a spiritual interest in David. Not a full on crush, let's say, but she finds him appealing at least.
I didn't think that was subtle. I thought she literally said she was like in love with him.
Okay, good. Yeah, I
Yeah,
found
so
that
I
too,
didn't
yeah.
think it was subtle at all. I think this lady was thinking about leaving the Salvation Army to be with David
Yeah,
until she found out that he was married. I think that's when she was kind of in a duality
yeah.
situation.
I don't know if she's like, hey, let's leave the Salvation Army now. But I think there
No,
is.
I'm
You're
going above
exaggerating. Okay, yeah, yeah,
exaggerating,
yeah,
but I think there was more than just I want to help this poor soul. She
yeah.
became fond of him.
Yeah, there is a again material aspect to the inauguration of that relationship.
Yeah, I was confused about that relationship because she does surprisingly say, "This is the man I love," and I was very confused by that because it seemed at first a little bit shoehorned. Like, this guy? I mean, there's nobody else in this village. This guy? So it almost felt like a forced romantic spin on things that we're so used to seeing in modern films. And maybe that is the case. I don't know. But by the end of the film, I was perhaps leaning slightly a different way, that maybe her love was more akin to the love that, if you look at the religious aspect of it, that someone like Jesus Christ has for everyone. And if you think about it, he was the first person to walk in, her first kind of, so to speak, customer. And she must have some kind of religious aspect to it. So God put this man in front of her. And so I think that created a bond with him that was a type of love. And that's what I kind of went with by the end of the film.
Yeah, I agree with that, Ragnar. Maybe not quite as extreme. But we mentioned Ragnar and I used to teach in Japan, and we started at the same time. But a few weeks later, another set of teachers started, and one of our friends, Dan, it was his first day, and he was so excited, and he didn't have any students that day. And he goes, "Hey, I want to go out in the lobby, and I want to go meet some students." So he and I went out there and we talked to, I mean, I don't know, must have been 30 different people who were like, why are you guys out in the lobby? But he was just so excited to start his craft and his new job. And I think this is a very similar case where she was just excited to help somebody and really, you know, had this sunken cost, which was I helped him even though he's not that cool. And he hurt me, damaged me, or inflicted something on me that I'm not going to get rid of. So I got to double down and really save his soul to make that worth it, was how I kind of read this.
Yeah, I think I read it as both. I think it was that kind of, a higher love and kind of spiritual love and bodily love were kind of mixed together, and she develops over time, and it develops so that the thing that's important is her spiritual love, and when she sees that has been fulfilled, um, she's able to go on.
Going back to the original question, which was how do we feel about the spiritual world? It's the world that is very spiritual. The spiritual world shown in this movie. I don't have anywhere to go with this, but I did want to compare it to another movie we watched called Afterlife, which had a very different view of the spiritual world and what it's like to transition from a life to death. But it's interesting that both movies ended up examining a life of a character in the movie. So even though they had very different approaches, examining that life seems important in both movies.
And they both have the same idea of let it go. Let it go of the material, being able to contain the things that happened in your life in order to say goodbye to them and transition on to something that you don't know what it is.
Well, Tom, where do we stand after round one?
Okay, after round one, oh my goodness, Ragnar is in the lead with 3. Nick is right behind him with 1. And KJ has set a new talking pictures trivia record with -8 points.
-10, Tom. Let's get the
Well,
-10. Let's get
-10, isn't it?
Oh, I'm sorry.
-10.
Negative
But as
10.
long as I can keep coercing you to make me bet all my points, 0's the limit on the upper side.
Well, what I'll say is don't celebrate too much yet because the episode's not over. He still may not be the worst loser yet, so we shall see. We'll be right back after this quick commercial break.
Talking Pictures Trivia Theater presents a Screaming Lapel Pin production. The Jane of My Youth, a coming-of-age story of young love, read by me, Tom. Chapter 8, The Alien Menace. As the blood spread around the table on the floor, Michael saw one of the figures drop onto the center of the room. It was short and not distinctly one gender or the other. The low levels of white light and the green glow reflected off of the white skin or covering of the creature. Riley's blood spread out before it as it began to work its way further into the theater. Michael couldn't look at the being. It seemed so otherworldly. Its face was not recognizable from the rest of its hazy form. Michael inched backwards, trying not to trip, trying not to lose sight of whatever this thing is. Mabusa slid towards the being, the rubber heels of his cheap shoes clogging with blood.
Aliens, you see. Aliens from afar. All along I knew that screaming lapel pins had manufactured the gateway between the planets. Their snazzy luxury wear, sexual appeal, and howling animal heads were merely a cover for their scientific research into locality displacement. We now can bring forward extraterrestrials from the planet Kepler 442, over 100 light-years away. Do you see, Jane, my pet? These are those superior beings who sent us the instructions to build the box. We only need to find the key, and thankfully our little Michael here had just the one we needed. Join the pin and box, open the gateway to a superior being, a species that will rule the world.
Jane stepped back. Still silent, she looked on, expressionless. What was wrong with her, Michael thought, still believing somewhere in the back of his mind that after all of this was said and done, they could go out on that date. He moved towards her, and Mabusa moved closer to the alien.
Welcome, my friend, to Earth, your new kingdom.
The creature turned and reached a long, slender limb towards Mabusa, yanking him forward. At that moment, Jane held up her hand over Michael's eyes. He heard Mabusa scream, a long, nasal, painful scream, interrupted by the sound of blood catching in his throat. When Jane took her hand away, Michael saw what had happened. The alien had pulled the head and spinal column directly out of the body of Mabusa, exposing webs of nerves and tendons rotting on the red, dying meat of his ruined muscles. His eyes had exploded, ocular jelly dripping down his cheeks and onto the broken muscle tissue still linked to his back. His voice still worked, and he screamed, begging for mercy, as the alien began to slowly tear bits of muscle from off Mabusa's face and placing it into its mouth. Blood spouted out of the flayed body like water from the Trevi fountain. The alien grabbed Mabusa's tongue and yanked it out of his head, causing another enormous stream of blood to shoot out of Mabusa and hit Michael square in the forehead, dripping down his nose and still open mouth. He grabbed Jane's hand. "Run!" This has been Talking Pictures Theater presentation of a Screaming Lapel Pin production, The Jane of My Youth, a coming-of-age story of young love. This week, Screaming Lapel Pins has on sale the lacerated avocado-hoarding white-breasted nuthatch. Pick one up wherever Screaming Lapel Pins are sold.
And we're back. Tom, take it away.
All right, thank you, Nick. The categories in this round are all taken from other Sjostrom films, and here they are. The Voice of Passion, The Divine Woman, He Who Gets Slapped, aka The Price is Rat. Ragnar, what would you like to pick?
There is no way I would pass up a category that says he who gets slapped. So let's go.
All right, let's go for it. This category, also known as The Price is Rat, rat meaning right, is a Price is Right style question.
It's time for question 4.
Without going over, how many intertitles are in this film? There are alternatives. Would anybody like to go for the alternative?
Yes, I'd like to go for the alternative.
And I'll give you 5 points.
Whoa. So before you ask the question, I'd like
What?
10. If nobody
10.
else is going for
Whoa,
it.
whoa, whoa.
Yeah, 10.
I'm going to go for the alternative.
You're going alternative? So we're going 5-5?
I'm fine where I'm at.
Oh, Nick is going to automatically win.
As long as he doesn't go over.
As long as I don't go over.
As long as you don't go over, that's right. Okay, so let me ask the alternative then. For Ragnar and KJ, how do you get out of the kitchen?
Locked in.
Lock in.
Locked in the kitchen.
All right, it sounded like Nick locked in first. So Nick, what do you have?
Well, since I'm the only one in the Price is Right category, and just to make it a little bit more interesting, I'm going to say 5.
So Nick, you have 9. Then you get a bonus question, which could add to your score, could add another 2 points to your score. Within 10, guess the number of intertitles that are not used to communicate dialogue. So intertitles without dialogue in it.
Did you say within 10?
Yes, within 10.
7.
And now I'll tell the answers for that. It was 132 and 9.
That's
You do
the
get the
win.
2. Yep, that's a win. You do get the 2 points. And now I want to hear, I think we did, Nick. And then KJ, I think you got to go now.
If you are locked in this particular kitchen that happens to have an axe, the first thing you do is you try to use the axe to knock out the lock. That will work fairly well. However, the door is still not open and you're in a bit of a rage, so you don't quite understand. So you then use the axe to hit the door. Once you get the top half of the door open enough for a dramatic effect, you then reach around and try to grab the doorknob that you would expect to be there. However, because you hit the doorknob first, the doorknob's not there. You then use the axe to continue to chop it where the doorknob would be on the side that you're on, which will then allow the door to open, and you come out swinging. That's how you get out of this kitchen.
Here's Johnny.
And Ragnar, what answer do you have?
I would say the exact same thing. I'll just add that before you go to the axe, maybe you should bang on the door and yell a little bit. And then why does it have to be locked? I do that every day. Every time I close the door, I find my nearest axe, I chop that thing down because doors are for suckers.
Agreed. Doors are for suckers. That's 10 points that go to both KJ and Ragnar.
Ragnar gets 10 points?
He gets 10
points
points
each.
because he asked for it, and I'm very nice.
Yeah. Go big or go home. These are the
I
Exactly.
would have done it for 10 points.
Yep. So that's Nick has 5. So Nick got back
Nick has 3.
5 total.
3 total.
3.
One on
Oh,
how
I'm
what
sorry.
actually killed David Holmes.
I thought he had
and
2 and then got 2.
Had
Yeah.
1.
1 on the David Holmes kill and 2 on the how many intertitles.
Oh, I'm
yeah.
sorry. You're right. I looked at the wrong column. Okay. Very good. All right. So why I brought this up is
Why did you bring this up?
I can't let the guests dictate how many random points they want anymore. I think we have to put a kibosh on
What? 3013?
it.
I blame myself.
Yeah.
I do too.
But so why I brought this up, what I'm interested in here is the influence this movie had and the echoes that we see of this. And Nick, I think you kind of indicated it with "Here's Johnny."
It actually echoes in both directions, because we have from a prior work, Broken Blossoms with the axe to the door, and then we fast forward to The Shining, and you have a similar situation with the bathroom door.
So I've never seen The Shining, but I was still hoping the intertitle card was going to say, "Here's Johnny."
That was ad lib too, by the way, for that movie.
Yeah. Well, I think they shot that scene 135 times. I think after a while, the Shining scene, I think after a while you just start yelling whatever because you're lost your mind from repetition.
Speaking of doors, how many doors must they have gone through for that? A pile of them?
135 doors.
Well, I guess for those who don't know what we're talking about, which I think is most people would understand, The Shining from 1980, Stanley Kubrick's film, and Jack Nicholson's famous scene when he might be getting possessed a little bit and starts hacking at a door to get someone.
Yeah, he goes after his wife and kid also, just as David is going after his wife and kids. But Nick, that's a really good point. It goes in both directions. Critics have often talked about the influence of Broken Blossoms on this picture, and yeah, it's a really good point because it's almost certain that Sjostrom had seen it. D.W. Griffith was very popular with him personally as an artistic influence, and so the kind of locked in the closet, terrifying father figure that is most likely taken from Broken Blossoms, as I think that came out about a year. I think it came out in 1920 in Sweden. It made it to Sweden by 1920. So that was big in the theaters when he was working on this project. Yeah, but it is the kind of endurance of this film is interesting. The critics I was reading, a lot of them initially when it came out saw this as the masterpiece that it was in the 1920s. It was listed as one of the three greatest films. I think along with Birth of a Nation and one other, I can't remember, but it was kind of on that list. And then by the 30s, it fell off, and it was really seen as a special effects exhibit, something out of the Lumiere brothers, rather than the film that we see. And it seems to be that part of the I don't want to call it a resuscitation, but maybe the afterlives or the way that we now consume this film for what it is. And a big part is Ingmar Bergman, and how profound an influence he had. And then, of course, that's reflected because Ingmar Bergman has had a profound influence on everyone who's made movies after what? What would you say, Ragnar? 1965, 1956? As
Yeah,
soon as they made
50.
it to America?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was reading about that, Tom, and they pretty much said that Ingmar Bergman watched this film at least once every summer, either alone or in the company of other younger people. Like it was a big influence on him and his works.
Yeah. You can see, Wild Strawberries, he literally is casting Sjostrom. The Seventh Seal is thematically on the same page. It's also about, I don't know what it is with the Swedes and this kind of idea of the disease of the body that one has to escape. It seems to be a theme in a lot of these, even though, obviously Bergman is very suspicious of religious belief in his movies. But what's sort of interesting about this conversation and about reading those critics is something like you were pointing out, Nick, is how this idea of the afterlife, this sort of formulation of the afterlife, is one that itself has been cut off. We don't talk about it anymore, even though the icon of the traveling Grim Reaper or something like that sort of persists. So it almost is like the visual ideas in this movie, the transparency of the characters, the idea of a ghost. There's actually one of the complaints from one of the critics in the 30s was, we don't know ghosts would be like this, which is profoundly dumb. But anyway, Anyway, like why can't they be solid? Sure, I don't know, but this is how this movie does it. But anyway, so it seems like the sort of the images, the icons are what trickle out of this movie. Breaking down the door with the axe, right, to get at your family. And I was wondering if you felt anything in this movie was familiar from your own viewing habits and favorite films.
One of the things I thought was interesting at the portrayal of the person driving the Phantom Carriage, and I actually am going to relate this back to Frankenstein. So, in the common understanding, we have a view of death and the Grim Reaper as synonymous, okay? Whereas this movie portrays this poor soul working for death. But in our mind today, how is death envisioned? It is a guy with a sickle, a scythe, and a draped, cape. In our version, a lot of times he's all bones, but still the same kind of portrayal there. Whereas in our discussion on Frankenstein, we relate the term Frankenstein to the monster, even though it really was Frankenstein's monster. So I don't know if this was just their interpretation or if over time death has become the one who is on the carriage. So I thought about that a little bit, and I'd love to hear if you guys, think that's something you thought, or if it's just a coincidence.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a very good point. And because I was also thinking the curse, so to speak, is said that you will become death's driver. You don't become death, you become death's driver. And so that is true. Death is not seen, so to speak. Death chooses the person dies, and then the driver, the Grim Reaper, goes and picks up that person. And yeah, it's very good. Just like Frankenstein, it has become the same person. And just as a quick side note, you were talking about, and I think this is a very good point, how I think maybe the only time I've seen it, the Grim Reaper is depicted as a very sad man, a broken man. And I think that is why I like the score by I think Mati Bai, I think his name is Mati Bai, because in that scene where George takes off his hood and you see him for the first time, the music is tragic. It is sad. It's not scary. You see David seeing his old friend and what fate he has been given. If you look at the more modern score, it's just sound trying to make it scary. So I think it loses the tragedy of the Grim Reaper. So I think that's a very good point, Nick.
Yeah, I think that's a good point from you too, Ragnar. This idea of this movie, it doesn't seem to be something that is scary, right? It doesn't fit into horror at all. And the Grim Reaper, while you don't want to become the Grim Reaper or the Wagoneer, however, whatever you want to call George, he's not like necessarily a threat, and he's actually, he ends up becoming entirely a positive role by the end of it. Okay, KJ, you get to pick between the final two categories. They are the voice of passion and the divine woman.
I'd like to do the voice of passion.
It's time for question 5.
Where and in what context does David's wife see him again long after she left him? Would anybody like an alternative?
I would like to have 20 points for the standard question, please.
For the standard question?
No, Nick, but I will give 10 points to the alternative.
Oh!
10
What's
points,
KJ
huh, Tom?
doing?
It's a big gamble. It's a big gamble. Yeah, we're set at
What are
a
you doing,
standard.
KJ?
Well, I think I know some of the answer to the standard question, but 10 points, Ragnar, that could really put me behind.
Juicy.
I'll go alternative.
You'll go alternative?
Nick.
Okay.
What's Ragnar doing?
I was just waiting for you, Nick. You guys are the host.
I know you're playing
guys go
games.
first.
I know. That's not how this works. I know that Ragnar is going to get the standard question right. But if I get the standard question right, it gets me no closer to the victory. So I have to go with the crazy 10-pointer.
Is everybody going with the
Let's do
10
it.
pointer?
Let's do it. All in.
Everyone's going with the 10 pointer.
Oh, no.
Okay. All right. So for that one, I'm actually going to go with the more interesting question. When it comes to the Nobel Prize, author of The Phantom Carriage, Selma Lagerlof, was the first person to do what two things?
Was she in the movie?
No, she wrote the book The Phantom Carriage that the movie's based on.
We're breaking
we've
the
talked about
rules
it.
for this 10 point.
No,
breaking
she's
the
in the
rules.
movie. She's got to be in the movie.
You mean impossible?
Yeah, I didn't research her.
No,
I
but
didn't even
think
know
it,
she wrote it until you
think it
told me.
through. She's a Nobel Prize winner.
Okay.
What two first things do you think she's done? Her winning the Nobel Prize was the first of two things.
Oh.
And be specific.
Locked in.
Is there partial credit?
If you get one, I'll give you partial credit. Yes, I'll give you 5 for one.
Wow.
But it's also a gamble, so you might lose 5 for the other. It's
specific to the Nobel Prize. It's not like she was the first person to eat the biggest sandwich in Sweden.
It's specific to the Nobel Prize. Because it starts off the introductory clause when it comes to the Nobel Prize. So it has to be within the context of the Nobel Prize.
I'm locked in.
I'm half locked in.
Oh, I didn't hear you. I'm sorry, Ragnar.
I'm locked in.
Okay. So I think it was KJ locked in first, then Ragnar, then Nick.
I'm half locked in, so
Okay.
I'm working on the other half.
All right. Do you want to?
No, just give me a second.
Okay.
So if I get partial credit and I get one right, but then I get the next one wrong, I'm back where I started pretty much.
Exactly. Yeah. But if they get it, if they get it wrong, you are tied for the lead.
Okay, I'm fully locked in.
All right. So, KJ, you locked in first. What do you have?
So I like my joke answers, and I'd like to say she was the first carriage driver that came back and got to write the story. It was kind of not quite a first-hand account, but yeah, kind of. But I'm gonna go with she was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize and the first author to win a Nobel Prize. Those are my two things that she did with a Nobel Prize that were firsts.
Okay. Thank you, KJ. Ragnar.
Okay. I also did woman, first female. And I went a different route. She was also the first Swede to win the prize.
Nick, what do you have?
I second what KJ had. I only knew that she was a female, and I knew that she was an author. So I'm saying she's the first for both of them to win the Nobel Prize.
You all are wrong. Ragnar, I think Ragnar was the closest, but
If we're all wrong, we're wrong.
you're all wrong. Oh my God.
Okay, so -7, -10, and 3. Is that where?
Yeah, so you're down to 3, Ragnar. KJ, you're down to -10. And Nick, what do you down to
-7.
Yeah, okay. So this is why I said specific, because she is the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. She's not the first woman to win the Nobel Prize. Madame Curie did it in 1903.
Oh, that's true.
Lagerlöf did it in 1906. And she is the first Swede to win the Nobel Prize in Literature.
Oh,
Not generally. We had 2 Swedish prizes going to, I'll tell you in a second if you're interested.
yeah. I didn't think I was right with female, but again, that was the only thing that I knew.
Yeah.
Was she was a female author.
We had the first Swede to win it, also in 1903, was Svante August Arrhenius for his work in electrolytic theory of dissociation. So, you dumb bastards! How did you not know that?
Tip of my tongue.
So
We have rules, Tom. We have rules.
I don't think I've ever listened to them. I don't
No.
want to break.
It's like,
precedent.
okay, I'm going to have 20 alternative questions worth 500 points.
All right. But in terms of the natural question, it was
The
The
Salvation
Army
Yep.
rally.
Yep.
yeah, it was where does she see him again after long after she has left him? It's the Salvation Army, and it's a discussion of prohibition. And I'm interested in the kind of way drinking is framed in this movie, and the way we see the prohibition effort. Just a little historical background: 1922, there was a vote to do prohibition, and it failed, 41 to 59%. 51 to 49%. So 51% of the voters were against prohibition, 49 for. It also split along gender lines. Women were overwhelmingly in favor of prohibition, men overwhelmingly against. So unlike America, there wasn't this absolute restriction on drinking. Yet I think the movie obviously takes a kind of pro-prohibition stance. And I was wondering what you guys thought of the way kind of evil and the different ways evil or bad influence gets at people is portrayed in this film.
Well, it was from the drink. I mean, every single person that they portray that goes down that path, it's somebody who brought them into a group of drinking buddies. And even early on, actually, the main character, David, I think this is before he goes to prison. He's literally, like, talking about a cliche, lying in the gutter, drunk out of his mind. So they're not even kind of shy about that. there is a direct correlation that those who drink in excess, and not even drink in excess, drink, are drawn to the dark side.
Yeah. Yeah, it's those things that give you pleasure are the things that destroy you, right? And it's the prohibition scene, kind of the prohibition hall, and it's an interesting spot for the wife and David to kind of meet again. They see that each other's there, and so the wife is able to go to Sister Edith and say, yeah, that's my husband. That's why he kind of fell into this mire. In the book, the wife is blamed more for the descent of David, which I think is wisely kept out of the movie. David is his own; it destroys himself. And I was wondering if there was a kind of irony built into the fact that the kind of the additional harm this woman, David's wife, experiences is in the context of this prohibition hall and this kind of grand effort for escape from these kind of material deteriorators.
My grandfather is Swedish, and he was born in the early 20s. So he is cut of the same cloth that the people in this movie are. And I've talked to him at length of how was it being raised in this kind of somewhat rural old Sweden. And it is a vastly different timeline and a vastly different type of person than what we're used to nowadays. And he doesn't drink. And it's not really because of a religious thing. It's just because that leads to bad behavior. And why would you want to do bad behavior? There's work to do. We have to look out after each other. It was a very community-based lifestyle. And for someone to drink, of course, with New Year's and some church services, yes, of course. But usually when people drink at that time, it was in excess. When it was a problem, it was when it was in excess. And you were seen as just like a plague. Maybe a plague is too rough, but you stuck out a lot because now you're not doing your part. And we are all suffering because of it. So now we all have to get together to try to fix this. And I think the movie is kind of on that side. It never portrays alcohol in any good light at all.
That's interesting to point that out. Because we've been talking about, a few of us have been talking about like the spiritual element and how alcohol is a deteriorator there, and bringing in the kind of the communitarian aspect of it is very interesting. I think it is a secondary concern of Sjostrom in this, but I do think like talking about how it dissolves community bonds does come up a bit, especially when we see the hostels, right? The hostels are the community gone wrong. All right, and here is the last question.
It's time for question 6.
What kills Sister Edith, and how does her death come about?
Is this one worth 15 points?
Oh, this one will be worth, it's supposed to be worth 3, but that's really boring. So I'll make it worth 10 across the board. And so that will be, if Ragnar gets it wrong, Nick, you're the winner.
And he gets it right.
And he gets it right, yeah.
Don't you worry. I got this. Locked in.
I'll take the alternative question.
There is another alternative. All right.
I know half of the.
It's all or none.
Nick looks very, very confident.
He does.
Yeah, I think I know the answer too, but I really want to hear the alternative question.
Some people just want to see the world burn, KJ. I'll stick with the original. Damn it!
Okay. So here's the alternative. What technique was used to film the ghost apparitions?
Dodged a bullet.
Don't worry, KJ. It was in the movie. I can't wait to hear KJ's answer, actually.
He's going to mention Ghostbusters. Locked in.
Locked in. So just to be clear, if I get the question right and you guys get it wrong, There's a surprise Victor here at the end.
There's always a surprise here
Yeah.
on Talking Pictures Trivia.
Yeah, it's calibrated so that anybody can win this one. Well, Ragnar, what is your answer?
Edith died of a severe cough that she contracted from David a year earlier.
Nick, what do you got?
Edith died from consumption, which she got from David when she was mending his coat a year earlier.
Okay, thank you, Nick. And KJ, what do you have?
So I don't know, but if I was to guess, I would assume they used some fancy double exposure to get the ghost apparitions on that film.
All right, and points go to KJ and Nick. Ragnar is very close. Nick had the more clear answer. Double exposure is what it's called. Very good. That's exactly it, KJ. So KJ is back up to 0.
Isn't consumption just a severe cough?
It
No,
kind of
it's
is.
a
pulmonary
bacterial infection.
It's a severe cough.
Okay.
No, that's
You
not
cough
what
to
kills
death.
you, is not the cough.
Is it not?
It's a type of respiratory disease. Yeah.
Bacterial
It's
infection that
It's a cough.
attacks the lungs.
Pulmonary related. KJ, what do you?
So KJ, what do you think? Just go to Nick or Ragnar?
Well, to be honest, my answer had the word double in it. I think my point should be double.
No, it should not be double. You're getting 10 points.
I'm getting double exposure,
Uh,
You don't got the consumption.
I believe it.
but I have the cough.
Severe.
So,
severe.
I hate to do this, but Nick, I think you win. I
Wait, that has to be the tagline for the episode. I hate to do this, but Nick wins. I think the fan base knows this already.
it was more of a reflection on not giving it to the guest.
We had to
That's right, 'cause I got all
significantly
of them
alter
right.
the points.
Yeah.
So Nick even had a chance to win an episode.
Oh,
Honestly, Ragnar, it was a fun one either way. I don't even care with this crazy assortment of points that went out today. But thank you, Tom, for that gracious congratulations.
you are welcome. All right.
Well, as I said, I extremely appreciate that after the insanity that just ensued on this episode. It honestly was a great one. We'll be back right after this quick commercial break.
It's time for Guess That Song, Whistling Edition. I'll whistle a song, and you guess what it is. Here we go. If you guessed Farmer Refuted from Hamilton, you're right.
And we're back.
It's time for Movie Rent.
Kind of my general rating, overall rating, which I think was hinted at throughout this, is that this is a Gnostic picture. That it's a picture interested in the more, the problems or the freedom from the body. That eventually that's what it's going for. It's going for being free from having the spirit, which is trapped by the flesh, looking to get out and be free and join the kind of spiritual oneness that is the beyond or is the better life. Um, and I think that's actually uh, plays out by reading of the multiple flashbacks plays this out, because what happens is the movie is shattered. It's a bunch of different units or a bunch of different stories thrown out across this plot. We get these kind of 4 or 5 separate stories, and they eventually in the end collect together into a moment of forgiveness. And what uh Gnosticism, which Lagerlöf was invested in, she knew about this. She was I don't know if you would say she was a worshiper in that way, but she was deeply interested and read a lot about this. Um, what's then interesting here is that the idea is that once the soul is free, it kind of joins the unity, the oneness, um, and here that's kind of how I read the multiple timelines, the splitting up the flashbacks. That eventually by the end, it's sort of George is God, and then we have David getting forgiveness, and at this point, all the timelines have kind of collected together into a oneness. So I think the Gnosticism is not only in the plot and in the fact that death can be a very positive thing, as we see with the death of Sister Edith, but it's also in the very structure of the film.
I'm not so sure exactly what Gnosticism is. How do you say it again there, Tom?
Sorry, my ends are off. Just my nose is stuffy for our listeners, which is why I sound different than normal. But Gnostic, Gnostic, and there was a pre-Christian religion that, like, there was a fall of great beings to the earth, and the souls of these people got trapped in flesh, and that they have to return to, be free and return to God, right, or whatever their version of God is. And eventually this grafted onto Christianity, because that's very similar to what Christian sayings are. The book of John, for example, the Gospel of John has Gnostic elements in it. um, Other gospels, like the Gospel of Thomas, is expressly Gnostic, using the Christ figure as its center. And what you see with Gnosticism is this idea of a kind of private knowledge that people have. They have a kind of a private knowledge of the spiritual world. Gnostic gnosis, knowledge. That's the derivation of that word. Um, but it's very much devoted to it. Why I bring it into this discussion? It's very much devoted to the material contains the brilliant spirit, and that death, while many of us might see that as a horror or the thing to avoid, that the Gnostics are suicidal, but they recognize that is the point of liberation, right? That's going to be freeing. It's a very anti-materialistic way of looking at things.
It's interesting because in this movie, by the end, David Holmes is not dead, yet is forgiven by his wife because he cries. I actually didn't like the end of this movie very much. I don't think he should have been freed from everything he did. So it kind of sounds either the opposite or it's an inverse of the Nogs. I still can't say it. Agnostic, right? Agnostic would be someone who doesn't believe in this. Nogstic is someone who does.
Refuses the knowledge. Gnostic. Yeah, it's not, you don't drink it. It's not.
It's not a holiday drink.
Yeah, it's not a holiday beverage. That is it. The ending is somewhat troubling for me too, because the idea is awareness that you are kind of on the right path. For Edith, it is awareness that David is whatever better now. She receives the knowledge that he is going to go forth in a righteous way, and then she's able to go, okay, I can die, right?
So you're saying for
Excuse
Edith
me.
it was knock sticks. I apologize, audience. But for David Holmes, the jury's still out, so to say.
He's acquired knowledge of his sins, right, and how to live a better life. So it is a denial of, I think, in part, an acceptance of responsibility, which denies the material pleasures, right? Like the kind of spiritual bond with his wife and with his children is going to be stressed over, pleasure, which is not really embodied in any kind of sexual way in this movie, but embodied in drink, in drunkenness. Um, and so I think part of it is acquired the knowledge, finding that, using the knowledge to kind of be redeemed and to do the right thing, to go into the righteous path. However, it happens pretty easily for him, right? As you're saying, he just says, like, I was just with the sister. And the wife goes, no, you weren't. I know for a fact you weren't. And he just goes, yeah, oh, nobody will believe me. And then he cries and, and and scene. So it's a quick bit of forgiveness, but I agree. I think the ending doesn't know what to do with itself.
I thought it was going to be a little darker myself as well. I do enjoy the ending for what it is, but I thought it was just going to have a darker undertone, that he did not escape that, or he had to do his penance, if you will, by serving death, not necessarily coming back. That I didn't necessarily expect him to come back. I thought it might have been a harsher lesson, but I don't dislike the way they went. But I could understand why you might think, KJ, he's getting off easy.
I think it's a generational thing. How usually the kids go the opposite way of the parents. In a way, I feel this movie and Victor, the director, Sjostrom, is forever linked to Bergman. And if you look at the age gap, it's kind of like a father-son relationship. If you want that kind of ending, you're going to get it with Bergman. So I think Bergman is kind of like that kind of feeling of this religion, this thing that we're leaning on that's supposed to, take us to the next level and make us happy, is not doing that. And he has a more bleak perspective on things. I think Sjostrom perhaps still had some kind of faith, not necessarily, or maybe in both the religion, but in the righteous path, that it will eventually get you to some kind of redemption. And, obviously I'm not putting this anywhere nearly as scholarly as Tom, but he hits rock bottom. He sees that his actions have pushed his wife to kill his kids. And that, I think, was his rock bottom. That's the moment of change for him. So maybe his change, I think the change is genuine, but her forgiveness did come a little easy. I do agree with that.
So the Bergman film that I also think is somewhat in conversation with this, but in the way you're talking about Ragnar, is, I don't know if anybody knows Through a Glass Starkly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, where in that movie, it's not necessarily, I don't know if it's necessarily agnostic, but the movie posits that God is a spider, right? That's what it ends up being, like the kind of revelation. It's not my favorite Bergman by a long shot. And it's part of a trilogy about questioning God, and I think the whole trilogy, to a degree, falls flat. The metaphor of God as spider is also a little obvious. But it's interesting to think of the person who made this movie, like you're saying, Ragnar, his artistic son is rejecting this and saying, this is not redemption, this is trap, right? And I could see Bergman pointing to that end scene that you mentioned, KJ, and going, this is your God, this is what he gives us. This guy tries to kill his kids with tuberculosis, and you know he says, please believe me, I want to change. And she goes, okay. So that is an interesting development in terms of like afterlives of this film, and how adaptation and how like kind of intertextual material uh, uh, work their way out through the generations.
Okay. So as great as the axe scene is, his side, it's tense. He's breaking through the thing, and it cuts to the woman, to I think Anne or Annie is her name. It cuts to his wife like 3 times, and she's putting on the kid's coat, her button. She's fumbling with the buttons. Lady, it's not that important. It's not that cold outside. Pick up the kids, grab the coat, maybe put it on the way out, or when you're at a friend's house, or when you're at the police station. Go. So that kind of took me out of the scene a little bit.
Yeah, I agree completely, Ragnar. It was a little strange. There's this manic guy destroying a door with the intent probably to kill you. And I don't know if the writers or the director's like, well, what should they be doing to make sure they don't leave? Well, have you ever tried to put a kid's coat on? Yeah, that's not easy. Let's put a kid's coat on. Like it's
the wrong button. I have to
they
start
should
all
be on
over
the left
again.
or on the right.
On the other side of the door in that scene too, the way he handles that axe to get through that door, like sometimes he's using it as a hammer, sometimes he's using the other side. It's just kind of just using it as a bat. I was like, you probably could have gotten through that door a lot quicker if you really put your mind to it.
Yeah, this movie should work on its axe scenes more. Hopefully the remakes were a little more solid. Well, The Shining, they're in a dead end, right? There's no way out of that room. So there you go. Stanley Kubrick
Yeah, it's a
saw your
bathroom.
criticism,
Yeah.
Ragnar, and he prepared for it.
The last thing I want to say is that not necessarily the content in the movie, but the movie itself. I'm going to touch again about how it's a great gateway for silent film, and I think silent films they're such a different kind of movie that it's almost a different kind of language. So this is a great movie because it has modern aesthetics to it in a way. It's easy for a modern viewer to come in, and it should not be the only silent film that you like. Instead, it should be the film that teaches you how to watch silent films, because there are some amazing, amazing movies. So this film, Modern Times, City Lights, and All Quiet on the Western Front are movies that can help a viewer understand how to appreciate the pacing and the characteristics of a silent film, and help one then venture into a very, very large world of excellent films.
I wouldn't be surprised if we start to cover some of those movies you mentioned over time. I guess this is the awkward part of the episode where I congratulate myself for winning. So good job, Nick, with these crazy points that were given out. So yay me. Ragnar, honestly, it was great having you on the show again today, and hopefully you'll join us again sometime.
I hope so.
He's giving his hats off to us. This is an audio only podcast, Ragnar.
I'm a visual artist. What can I say?
I'd also like to thank our speculative editor, KJ, who masterfully crafts these episodes. Check out our website, talkingpicturestrivia.com, for more information about us and our episodes. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, and Stitcher, as well as our YouTube channel. We are extremely grateful for any positive reviews, as those help others like you find us. If you like what you hear, remember to like and subscribe to our show. Join us next time when we discuss Nick's recommendation, which is my recommendation, from 1990, Home Alone. We have a special guest. My wife, Christine, will be joining us, and this is one of our holiday favorites, so should be a good time. See you then. Ding, 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 ding. I was joking with them I had just watched the conclusion of this movie, and I was debating whether to talk about it, but I kind of ran out of steam. But I'll tell you anyway, Ragnar, because you're on the call right now. So I finished watching this movie, and I was like, this was a really enjoyable, great movie. I really loved how this movie played out. And all across the screen, it's a black and white movie. So the screen is pretty much black, and there's a 4-letter word that comes up in Swedish. And I'm like, what did this movie just call me? Now, I know in Swedish it's pronounced slut, but it means the end or final. But it was just so funny that I had a moment with this movie, and it almost like friggin' cursed at me. So
Agreed. I brought my wife. I'm like, Elkie, come check this out.
I did the same thing.
I literally text KJ and Tom. I'm like, what did this movie just call me?